They call me negligent. I call it staying awake while everyone else decides old people should go quiet. I'm Maya Collins, 32, Willowbrook Care Center night shift. Meticulous because mistakes have bodies, sleep-deprived enough to hear the vents hum my name, stubbornly compassionate in a way that gets me called too intense by day nurses who paint their nails between pill passes. I'm the one you page when someone's breathing goes weird at 3 a.m. Recently divorced, still holding the shape of my mom's lonely death, like a bruise I press when I need to remember why I don't let things slide. Tonight's a rain-glossed Tuesday. The corridors glow a sick, steady fluorescent. The air smells like antiseptic and peppermint ointment because one of the aides rubs it on shins to keep the skin from breaking when the sheets drag. The vents hum, the battery carts tick, the bulletin boards are stuffed with family photos that curl at the corners. Neon green fuzz from tennis balls on Walker. Only here, last week I watched Mrs. Thompson go dim around the edges. The kind of dim you miss if you've decided old is just another word for fading. Slurred vowels droop like a soft tide pulling down one corner of her mouth, her hand not finding the nurse call button on the first try. I said stroke in a voice that got me 2 eye rolls and a let the doctor decide from a supervisor who hasn't had a night in years. I pushed. Rapid response. Coded overhead. Blue team to B Hall. The minutes before transport stretched like gum. I counted them anyway. 60 seconds for the cuff. 30 to repeat the smile test. 20 to get an order. 10 to feel that flash of, oh God, what if I'm wrong? Then the scan said I wasn't. Silent stroke. Protocols kicked. They told me good job while they passed the credit around like a plate of cookies. And now there's an incident report on my desk. Administration wants clarification on scope of practice and tone with family. The rumor mill has knives. Someone saw me overstep with Mrs. T's daughter. The daughter thanked me and then said, "Careful, don't scare my mother like that. That's the doctor's job." Cool. I saved your words, and now I'm supposed to apologize for using mine. I flipped through Mrs. Thompson's chart at the nurse's station, the hallway humming, rain beating on the window like breath. I'm meticulous, remember? I want my documentation clean. Neuro checks at 1830, 1900, 1930, BP at 1855. But there it is in the med log. Ativan 0.5 milligrams, 1915, initials MC, my initials. I didn't give that. Sedating someone you think is stroking is how you bury symptoms under a wet towel. I taste metal. I taste my mother's bedside air the night an aide skipped her turning schedule and wrote it down anyway. That's how she got the sores. That's how she went quiet. The PA system coughs. Transport ETA 5. The cart beeps. People move around me like I'm furniture. I check the hallway camera feed on the little black and white screen by the door. The one we pretend is just for show because it skips whenever laundry machines start. 1914. Mrs. Thompson's door, me going in. 1928. Me coming out, hitting the call button, ripping the cord off the wall because it takes too long. 14 missing minutes, right when a dose I didn't give appears under my name. Break of expectation. I look up and catch my reflection in the camera glass, and for half a second I see my mother's mouth, that droop, that please don't leave me tilt. A paper is folded tight inside my locker, no name, just 4 words. Stop digging, or else. They call me negligent. Here's the uncomfortable truth. What scares them isn't that I might miss something. It's that I don't. Someone cut the minutes I saved out of the night like a tumor and left me the scar. The peppermint sting burns my throat. The rain drums harder. I slide the note into my pocket and open Mrs. Thompson's chart again. There's a page missing. The staples show the tear. The hole looks like a mouth trying to speak. They call me Maya Collins, 32. And I wear scrubs like a second skin. I slide through the unwelcoming corridors of Willowbrook Care Center, a night shift nurse tackling the frigid air of this place with my stubborn warmth. Strange how reduced the world feels here, like breathing through a straw. The fluorescent lights buzz above me, competing with the steady hum of oxygen tanks and the soft beeping of heart monitors that punctuate the silence. I'm on high alert, always sensing that something lurks just beneath the surface of everyone's quiet lives. The smell is an antiseptic cocktail, spiked with a faint hint of peppermint from the ointment that clings to my palms as I pass it around, smoothing over brittle skin like a ritual. At night, the workload shifts. The day nurses drift in and out, frequently tethered to their phones, handing us the night shift and exhaustion like a baton in a relay we never signed up for. They can't see the lives behind the charts, the eyes that blink back at me from pillows low and unyielding, or the hands that steady themselves against the bed rails. I let my compassion spill over, often called overzealous or too intense, because I find it hard to look away, hard to accept that old age might just be a backup plan for neglect. But this job doesn't just demand, it siphons. I traded my marriage for late-night vitals, my 20s for hard lessons etched in old stories. My ex-husband doesn't. I'd nod, feeling that effort unwind like an old scarf, frayed at the edges. The truth, I make sacrifices for these strangers, weaving their lives into my heart. I miss my daughter's soccer games, and her birthday last month felt like a bitter pill stuck in my throat. A reminder that while I care for other mothers' children, mine knew I wouldn't be there. I keep the phone close during my shifts, hoping she'll picture me under the buzzing lights, surrounded by an army of scrubs. I can't let myself forget, even for a moment, that I'm supposed to be there for her too. Yet amid all this, I'm trying to take care of my aging father, keeping him steady, standing sentinel for the falls he fears. I check in every day, but sometimes I close my eyes a little too long and find the sound of my father's rattling breaths haunting my nights. The last thing I want is to be the wind that silence sweeps away in the night. Every time I hold his hand, I'm reminded of the fragility of the elderly. I battle the remnants of her loss, telling myself I'm willing to bear it, but it adds weight as heavy as the scrubs I wear. Tonight, the air feels even colder. A tension hums beneath the surface like the gathering clouds outside. I catch sight of Nurse Harris. She's been whispering warnings about Dr. Bennett, an all-too-casual intern whose hand is too light on the pulse. I want to believe we agree on the sanctity of care, but she seems to have her eyes glued to her watch, waiting for this shift to end. "Just don't get caught in his crossfire," she mutters, and I catch the flick of nervous energy in her hands as she pours herself another cup of coffee. I recognize that flicker. It's a reminder that there's always a line between urgency and carelessness here. And then, just as I'm about to check on Mrs. Thompson, I notice a family gathered near her door. Their voices rise, harsh against the stillness, a jarring contrast to the muted world I'm accustomed to. I see their anxious face. I brace myself, already sensing the impending storm. It feels like the weight of the night is about to shift. With each moment counting down, I realize something is about to crack, just as surely as the night goes on. My gut sinks as I remember that page I found missing from Mrs. Thompson's chart. Everything around me holds its breath, teetering on the brink of whatever fate awaits, a shift waiting to snap. The air in Willowbrook Care Center felt heavier that night. A taut wire stretched tight, waiting for something to snap. I could sense it even before I stepped onto the ward for my shift, where the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like persistent mosquitoes. Just 10 minutes in, I found myself in the thick of it. There was Mrs. Thompson, my Mrs. Thompson, sitting just a bit too still in her room, her hand resting against the cheek, any trace of her usual sparkle gone. I approached carefully, half wondering if perhaps I might have miscalculated my earlier concerns, but the tension came at me swiftly. like a cold draft sneaking under the door. Her family was gathered near the window, voices rising higher as they clipped through the usual night air. I could overhear snippets. Why hasn't she been checked on? This is unacceptable. Their pointed looks flared my adrenaline. I had counted every second since I last attended to her, done every check according to protocol. How could they not see? But their fear and anger blazed hotter than reason, igniting a spark that promised an explosive confrontation. Dr. Bennett walked in just as I approached them. The casual way he brushed past me, like I was nothing more than a post-it note on his agenda. I felt my heart sink as he jerked his thumb toward Mrs. Thompson. She doesn't look good, does she? He made a theatrical show of looking at her chart, shaking his head. Must have slipped through the cracks. How many charts did you gnaw on tonight, Maya? Can't be too many, right? If you've ever been unjustly accused, you know exactly how I felt. My stomach twisted as I composed myself, wrestling the familiar helplessness down. I've been in and out of her room all night, doctor. Her vitals are stable, but her family... Family? He interrupted. Family doesn't matter if you're ignoring your patients. The eyes of Mrs. Thompson's daughter turned to me, a knife's edge of betrayal. You've been negligent. This is not how we expect our loved ones to be treated. The daughter's voice cut through the air like a siren, bringing attention to our corner of the hall. I could feel the other staff witnessing this public humiliation, gauging whether they should come to my aid or pretend this was another day at the office. Dr. Bennett leaned in, his breath heavy with condescension. Perhaps you should consider a different line of work if you can't handle this basic responsibility. Little did I know that this attitude would put me against the entire hospital. My skin felt flushed, hot, stinging. I had spent years pouring my heart into this profession, waiting in every moment for that spark between patient and caregiver. But here I was, a circus act labeled a failure. But in the midst of this chaos, I wrapped my arms tighter around my resolve. I watched the sparks fly, and instead of curling inward, I drew a deep breath and straightened my back. This moment wouldn't bury me. I document everything I do, I said coolly, directly in Dr. Smelf. Bennett's eyes, the strength of my words a low rumble of defiance. You know I've been monitoring her. I'm not going anywhere. Despite the rising stakes, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I turned my gaze to Mrs. Thompson's chart, my fingers dancing over the paper as I made notes on each interaction. Every check, no detail too small to include. Each word there to ground me in the truth of my care. I knew the hours would be scrutinized, the records could be twisted. But my conscience was clear. This moment of injustice wouldn't fester beneath my skin. It would become fuel. As Mrs. Thompson's family began arguing, the doctor stepped back, clearly feeling the herd tighten around him. We'll have to escalate this, he said with false softness, looking down on me as if the whole bag of theatrics cast me into a shadow. At that sentiment, my heart sped up. Their rage cultivated more than just anger in me. It ignited a wariness I had almost forgotten. The air seemed thick, laden with anticipation. In the mere act of maintaining my cool, I realized a gamma of suspicion was stretching across the room. I could feel the electric current of unease. The tiny fractures started to form. I sensed eyes lingering on me. There were those who would take Dr. Bennett's side, who would fold under pressure. And it was in that silence that everything began to collapse. I didn't know where this would go, or the barriers that would be raised against me in the coming hours, but I could already feel it breathing down the nape of my neck. Destiny was already whispering, weaving itself tightly into the fabric of this night. One string pulled, leaving marks that would haunt me long after the storm passed, and whether I could navigate this minefield remained unspoken, an unfolding question trapped within the mechanized rhythm of a night shift. One thing I knew, the stakes had never been higher, and a fight that had begun lightly simmering was about to boil over. I took my pen and pressed it against the paper, ready to commit every detail to ink. The fear, the fatigue, the looming shadows, they all blurred around me. But at that moment, I was tethered to the truth. The air in the Thompson's family erupted into escalating anger, spiraling around me like a cyclone. I could feel their frustration clawing at me, stripping away my composure piece by piece as they leveled accusations of negligence, of failure, pointing fingers as if I were the serpent in their garden of care. I stood there, absorbing their wrath, hoping against hope that reason would crack through. "No, please, I've been monitoring her," I pleaded, my voice steady despite my heart racing. "She's stable. I'm here every night." Yet all I received in return were cold, hard stares, the kind that felt like splinters under my skin. Their anger festered like an open wound, spilling over into the corridor, where the other staff pretended not to eavesdrop. "Maybe we should get someone else," Mrs. Thompson's daughter snapped, her voice rising to a pitch that made my stomach churn. My heart sank. I could feel the ripple of the nurses behind me, some looking sympathetic, others with smirks that made my blood boil. I had never felt so exposed, like a ragged doll left on display for every shadow to peer into. But just as I braced myself for the next blow, I heard Dr. Bennett step in, his voice dripping condescension. "Let's not escalate this further," he said, glancing at me with an expression that screamed disdain. "Clearly, there's been a misunderstanding." I clung to his words like a buoy. Maybe, just maybe, it would quell the flames roaring around us. But when he turned back to the family, I saw the smirk play across his lips as he added, "We all need to maintain our professionalism, don't we?" There it was, the shifting weight of scrutiny, pinning me to the ground. I bit down hard on my tongue, willing myself not to retaliate. The throwaway tone in his voice made bile rise in my throat. I was fighting for this woman's life, and he was maintaining appearances. Yet in that moment, while my thoughts circled like birds, I couldn't find a clear line of defense. "I just want to care for your mother," I finally said, letting the words sink into the silence that stretched taut around us. Miraculously, silence enveloped the family, and for but a moment I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they could hear me through the veil of miscommunication. But hope is fickle. Just as quickly as it arrived, my option for respite slipped away. "Look!" The daughter shoved a crumpled piece of paper in my direction, the light catching just right to illuminate the wrinkled sheet that read, "Document Review, Concerns of Neglect," across the top. That wasn't just a piece of paper. It was my career, wrinkled and stained. "This was left in my mother's room," she accused, her voice pointed, her finger jabbing toward my chest. I felt the weight of that wrinkled sheet multiply tenfold. It was like a lead weight hardening in my gut. Just when I thought I'd earned some measure of understanding, it was as if the universe decided it wasn't finished carving out the injustice yet. The muted eyes of other patients in nearby rooms stared at me, their unvoiced opinions hanging in the air like the smell of antiseptic. I could feel them judging, feeling the pain of Mrs. Thompson's family seeping into their own. "Let's file a complaint," the daughter declared, and I could see it was her red line. Before I could gather my composure to protest, cheering the chaos on was Dr. Bennett, nodding along like my worst nightmare incarnate. "That might be wise," he agreed, with bone-chilling smoothness. "We need to set the record straight." A wave of humiliation washed over me then, as hands shifted behind my back. The laughter and whispers of my peers burned into my skin, and I felt more naked than I ever had in my scrubs. I wanted to scream, but I'd done everything possible, that I was here to care, that I caught the silent stroke. But the words stalled in my throat, caught on a lump of despair that threatened to choke me, like the suffocating, fluorescent lights overhead, buzzing from the ceiling as if reminding me I was trapped in their light. But then, just when humiliation tested every ounce of my will, it happened. My phone buzzed in my pocket, the sound pulling me back toward an unexpected thread of possibility. I instinctively reached into my pocket, soundlessly favoring the chance of distraction over the courtroom of their judgment. I barely glanced down at the screen, and the text was from a patient's family member, an old friend I hadn't seen in years. "Maya, I'm worried about my father. Can you check on?" And it mocked, and my cheeks flushed hot. I stood there gaping, as if raw disbelief had clawed itself onto my face. I heard Mrs. Thompson's daughter exhale deeply, her scorn drawing me back into their hostile realm. "You're a disgrace," she spat, and my heart sank. It suddenly felt like the walls of the care center were closing in, the weight of their accusations ready to suffocate me. I stood on wobbly legs, barely able to believe how quickly I had gone from an advocate for care to a scapegoat in front of the very people I had sought to protect. In that moment, I realized the stakes had risen exponentially. Not only was my professional reputation hanging by a thread, but I was now the target of this family's grief and anger, a perfumed, well-dressed dagger aimed squarely at my heart, with no shield to deflect it. And in the ensuing murmurings among the onlookers, as they passed their judgment like a documentary of my downfall, something gnawed at me. Would the truth be enough? Would they ever understand my intentions buried beneath the chaos of their grief? I braced myself, my heart trying to find its rhythm amidst the turmoil. But the chaotic energy of the night began swirling around me again. And that's when I heard a voice that would change everything. "Let's talk this through," said a different voice, calm like an anchor. I turned to see a familiar face emerging through the crowd, my colleague, Emma. And her words were the first thread of hope stitching itself through a night marred with shadows. I didn't know whether I could endure the agony of what was unfolding, but deep down I sensed that perhaps this wasn't the end of my fight. It could very well be the beginning of something far more powerful than I had envisioned. I could feel the heat radiating off my own skin as I stood there, a lone figure in a fractured tableau, the air thick with tension. It felt as though I had somehow stepped into a play. But this was no ordinary performance. It was. Their eyes didn't just pierce through me. They clawed at my very essence, scraping away layers of my resolve like I was nothing but paint on a wall. "Negligent. You've been negligent," Mrs. Thompson's daughter seethed, her voice taut with indignation. And each word cracked against the silence, echoing in my ears long after she spat it out. I felt my breath hitch, as if the words were a noose tightening around my throat. "How can you even show your face here? It's unacceptable," chimed in another family member, and they crowded closer, their faces lit with the glow of accusation. I didn't want to be in the spotlight, this uninvited gaze that felt like 1,000 tiny knives. The other staff watched from the edges, their eyes shifting between me and the unfolding chaos, unwilling or unable to intervene. I willed myself to speak, to assert my truth, but the words stuck in my throat. What should have flowed like a river turned into a dry creek bed, filled with crushed hopes and self-doubt. "Mrs. Thompson, I started, but her daughter's hand shot up like a stop sign, her finger jabbing at me as if it was a missile, and my heart dropped. "I don't want to hear it. You should have done your job. Why should we trust you? You're only here because you didn't make it anywhere else, right?" Her words dripped with disdain, each syllable a strike, each syllable a dagger. Around us, the other nurses stirred, and whispers flickered like moths around a flame. I could feel their pity, their uncertainty. It added another layer to my humiliation, smothering me in shame under the fluorescent lights. "Look." She thrust that crumpled complaint letter my way, like evidence in a trial. "This was found in my mother's room. You've been sloppy, and you will answer for it." It felt as if the air had left my lungs. In this moment, it was hard not to feel like I was shrinking, being pushed down, crushed under the weight of their anger. "I've been here," I whispered, a desperate plea against the rising tide of fury. "I care. I've been with her, monitoring her." But my voice faltered, drowned out by a chorus of discontent. "Yet you let her slip through the cracks?" they jeered, echoing the intern's earlier derision, and the comment paralyzed me. I felt it, a swell of despair, wrapping around my resolve and squeezing. A threat loomed over me, a suspension, legal consequences, my career dangling by a thread. "You're a disgrace to this profession," someone sneered, and I felt my soul flinch as if physically struck. The weight of their stares pressed down harder. I could sense the audience around us, a jury that had already rendered its verdict. I wanted to back down, to fold under the chaos, to escape the gaze of every single person who looked at me like I was less than human. I gripped the edge of the chart in my hand, letting the paper crinkle beneath my fingers, my lifeline in a sea of accusations. But as I faltered, a glimmer of something flickered deep within me, a resilient spark begging to ignite. "I'm here every night, fighting for your mother," I finally exclaimed, the words tumbling out in a tide of desperation and truth. "I'm not just a face in scrubs. I speak to her. I'm with her. What do you think I've been?" But there came the wave of anger again, crashing back over me. "You don't care. If you did, we wouldn't be here." The daughter advanced, pointing now, and I could feel the warmth of shame pool in my chest. It wasn't just her accusation. It was the collective disappointment of everyone around, the silent audience that held their breath, choosing not to act while I stood there, tangled in my own disarray. Dr. Bennett was lingering in the back, a shadow looming, smirking at my unraveling, ready to pounce if I made a wrong move. "I think it's best, Maya, if you excuse yourself from this conversation," he said, his words slick as oil, dismissing me as if I were a child caught misbehaving. In that moment, I felt small, an angry toddler lashing out, and it only fueled their fire. "I won't back down," I shouted, my voice rising above the swell of anger, desperate to reclaim my strength amid the swirling chaos. "This is my job. I'm here to care for patients when everyone else clocks out. I'm not going to cower." Yet with every word, the family's disappointment flared hotter. I could see them turning their heads, exchanging incredulous looks as if the mere act of my existence was a personal affront to them. But my heart felt heavy, burdened by the faces of those around me. Even the whispers of the patients started to tumble in my ears, each one echoing a shared sentiment unsaid. They were waiting for something. But what? Yet still, I couldn't let them shove me down, not anymore. Just as I felt the tides shifting against me, I caught sight of someone unexpected among the nursing staff near the doorway. Emma, my steadfast ally, was stepping forward, her eyes bright with determination. A reforming thread slid through the cacophony of voices, weaving its way along the fabric of our situation. I didn't know what she was going to say, but just seeing her there filled me with a renewed strength. But before I could savor that flicker of hope, the pressure returned, and I could hear the daughter shouting louder, cornering me, finger poised as though to strike a blow. "You don't deserve to wear those scrubs. You think you can hide behind your degree, but you will see your folder cross paths with a lawsuit. I will make sure everyone knows about your negligence." Just as that steel glinted in her eye, I felt my stomach coiled tight once more. With my heart hammering, I stood there wobbling on the edge of me. Could I endure this battle? Would I lose it all? But as my breath hitched in my throat, I took a steadying step back. And that was the moment. I gripped my hands around the edge of the chart, my heart glossy with uncertainty, but somehow alive with a fight I had nearly forgotten I possessed. I held my head high, channeling every ounce of my dedication into that single moment. But just as the tension peaked, when every accusation seemed to crystallize around me like ice, I hadn't expected what would follow. The unexpected voice rising above the clamor. As I struggled to hold on to my dignity, I was about to find out who might still stand with me against this tide of fury. The storm of accusations whirled around me, the flames of anger licking at my heels like ravenous wolves. Just as I thought I might choke on the caustic words of Mrs. Thompson's family, Emma's familiar face cut through the noise. She stepped forward, eyes bright with determination, ready to intervene. As she opened her mouth to speak, the tension in the room ebbed slightly, like the tide pulling back to reveal something forgotten beneath the surface. "Wait," she said, her voice calm yet firm, cutting through the cacophony that had swallowed me whole. "Before we go any further, I think you need to see something." The family's hostility faltered for just a moment. Could it be confusion? Curiosity? Whatever it was, I found my breath hitching in my throat. Emma pulled a small folder from under her arm, revealing a stack of papers, familiar papers. Mrs. Thompson's chart. My gut twisted as I sensed the weight of her words. This was left behind in Mrs. Thompson's room during the last inspection, she continued, her fingers trembling slightly with the importance of what she was about to reveal. "I found it earlier today, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing." My insides twisted as I recalled the night of the incident, fleeting moments from a day that had already turned the world upside down. "What do you mean?" I asked, but the words were barely a whisper. Emma nodded, her eyes wide, the kind of intensity that told me this was serious. "Look at the timestamps," she urged. I could feel all eyes shifting to her, the family's faces drawn tight with skepticism, still reading for every nuance of my reaction. "There's a discrepancy." My heart raced as she laid the papers out on a nearby cart. I leaned in, squinting at the delicate script written across the forms. I could barely catch my breath as the realization enveloped me. Here were the vital signs I had been meticulously monitoring, alongside entries I had never made, entries stamped with someone else's initials. An unfamiliar hand had been tracing lines on my watch, the very watch that had branded me negligent. "Where did you find this?" I breathed, sensing the layers of revelation unfolding around us, thick with uncertainty. The implications churned in my gut, a storm brewing in the pit of my stomach, as I glanced at Emma's face, searching for reassurance. "I found it wedged beneath the bed while cleaning. It seemed odd, so I checked," she explained, the urgency of her voice tugging at the back of my mind. "But see?" She pointed to a peculiar mark on one of the papers. "This signature isn't yours." As I scrutinized the ink and the peculiar looping letters, something twisted. Each swoop and dip struck a nerve. I'd seen that handwriting before, somewhere tangled in my memory, familiar yet distant. My stomach dropped as pieces fell into place. This is Dr. Bennett's handwriting." Emma's nod felt like a lifeline, and yet it struck like a knife. I felt my heart sinking again, a deeper dread seeping in like a shadow. "He turned in false documentation?" I asked, barely daring to voice the troubling reality. Was he trying to set me up?" "We can't be sure yet," Emma cautioned, though her own doubt hung heavy in the air. "But if he manipulated the records—" Her voice trailed off, the heaviness of the implication curling itself around my throat like a noose. I couldn't help but think back to earlier that night, the way he had dismissed me, belittled my efforts right in front of the family, as if he were laying the groundwork for his attack. Anger simmered under my skin, hot and furious, but then that tiny, wavering sliver of hope flickered in my chest. What if I was right, and he had orchestrated this whole mess? The murmurs began anew. Mrs. Thompson's family shot suspicious looks at the evidence Emma had unearthed. "This doesn't clear you," Mrs. Thompson's daughter snapped, her frustration boiling over, desperate to maintain control. "It just complicates everything more." "No," I countered, desperation surging forth, urging me to claw my way out of this trench of doubt. "It complicates things for him." I almost dared to hope. "We need to report this. It could show a pattern." but the room had shifted. The weight of reality settled like a heavy dark cloud, thickening the air until it felt suffocating. I could sense fear and doubt swirling around us like a storm, colliding with the glimmering thread of hope that dangled tantalizingly close, yet felt ever receding. My hand trembled as I picked up the papers. Among them lay a small file, a crumpled doctor's order for medication I recognized from Mrs. Thompson's chart. My breath caught as I laid eyes on it. There was another note scrawled hastily across the back, a single line buried in chaos. "Don't forget to clean up the mess." The coiling anxiety in my gut twisted painfully, unfurling into full-blown panic. "What mess?" I whispered, eyes darting to Emma, the reality of the confrontation clawing at the edges of my sanity. The family looked between one another, their anger softening as confusion crossed their faces. The tension in the air shifted, thickening as new questions began to creep in. "What does this mean?" Mrs. Thompson's daughter asked, her tone vulnerable, dipping into something softer, suddenly deflated and vaguely intrigued. And then, just like that, a chilling silence descended, wrapping us in a blanket of uncertainty. Underneath the thick tension, I felt something shift. Somewhere, hidden in the folds of the night, a faint stir of possibility was lit anew, and I realized someone knew the truth and had just let it slip. The weight of the moment pressed down on me like the heaviest of blankets. Emma stood beside me, shifting nervously, the mismatched pile of papers between us a stark symbol of the shift in the tide. I could see Mrs. Thompson's daughter, her furrowed brow beginning to unravel, yet there was still a hardness in her eyes. In the midst of nearly all of my coworkers turning their attention toward us, uncertainty rippled through the air, like the leading edge of a storm gathering strength. Then Dr. Bennett stepped forward, the smile on his lips a veneer for the rancid duplicity beneath. "What is this, Emma? Don't tell me you're falling for the theatrics of a nurse who's already compromised her own credibility." He had the audacity to laugh, a dismissive sound that cut through the tension. "You think you can defend negligence with some hastily scrawled charts? Don't embarrass yourself." The family's eyes flickered between Emma and me, the small glimmer of hope beginning to dim under the weight of his laughter. I wanted to scream, to tell everyone how I'd watched Mrs. Thompson waste away, how I fought for her when her family thought she was just a number. But here he was, this cocky, arrogant man who had built himself a fortress of lies, and I was standing here with evidence in hand, realizing just how much I had underestimated the depths of his deceit. But I was done with being underestimated. "Dr. Bennett," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut glass, "you're the one who's about to be embarrassed." I pointed to the papers, righteous fury swelling in my chest. "What's your excuse for this? Or will you just play the blame game? Isn't that what you've been doing, hiding behind other people's charts?" His rippling facade began to crack. I could see it in the way he clenched his jaw, his eyes narrowing into those slits of venomous intent. Now, let's keep this professional. Shall we?" He leaned in, invading my space, but I stood my ground, refusing to take a step back. I might even agree to overlook all of this, if... "If what?" I demanded. My heart raced, the rhythmic thumping echoing my mounting outrage. "If you admit you're in over your head," he sneered, "I can't have a nurse taking undue risks if she can't handle the job. Maybe it's time you find a profession better suited to your soft-hearted nature, don't you think?" And that, right there, flipped a switch. An eruption of indignation fountained up inside me, a hot tide of pain and fury. "Your words might wound me, Bennett, but your ego is what's going to bury you," I spat, the heat of the moment pushing me to rise above the bile of his disrespect. I turned my gaze to the family. "Do you know what I've seen? I've dealt with families whose love is eclipsed by the fear of losing someone. I've carried patients' hopes while their loved ones wished for miracles. Don't you dare minimize that to a soft-hearted nature." In those charged seconds, I could feel the family starting to shift. Each fervor of indignation was contagious. The murmurs began to build as they looked between us, my voice carrying the weight of truth. Mrs. Thompson's daughter faltered, confusion flickering across her features as realization started to seep in. "What do you mean? You're saying he's the one who's been playing this whole thing like a game," I interrupted, desperate and resolved. "And I've been on the front lines, risking my career to uncover this. But it was never about me. It was about providing care for your mother." I glanced down at the papers again, frustration churning within me. "Do you see? The hand that wrote these notes is not mine, and it certainly isn't a reflection of the care Mrs. Thompson received." At that, the room felt as though it tilted. Emma shifted her weight, and before I realized it, she shot me a sardonic sideways look. I could see it, the gears moving in her head as the pieces began to link together. Each family member's expression morphed from misplaced anger to uncertainty. Dr. Bennett's bravado slid a little, but I could see the shadows creeping back. "You don't know what you're talking about," he pressed, waving a dismissive hand. "It's called delegation. You can't expect to understand everything just because you don't scrubs and a stethoscope." "Delegation?" I scoffed, the warmth of rage igniting my resolve. "Is that what they call neglecting responsibility? You did this to paint me in a corner, didn't you? Because..." Before I could finish my thought, the tension in the air shifted violently, igniting like fireworks. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" "Doctor," Bennett snapped, desperation clawing at his throat. "You'll tear each other apart for the job. You're nothing but a cog in a machine." The room held its breath, every single gaze drawn into the heart of the tempest. My heart raced. Here was the boiling kernel of truth, sweltering beneath the surface, and it was hot enough to burn. I could practically see the walls closing in around us, but instead of drowning in despair, I felt the weight of the truth soaring above me. "Cogs turn until they stop," I countered, my voice laced with defiance. "But I won't be a cog in your machinations. This ends tonight." Drawing in a deep breath, I took another step forward. "No more lies, no more pretending. I'm ready to take this to administration if I must. You've tried to bury me, and you've underestimated my fight. Your fear tactics don't work on me." At that, the tension in the room ignited the last sparks of resistance. Silence fell with the weight of clarity, and my heart pounded. The crabby old man from room 204, who I thought had been blissfully snoring through the entire episode, suddenly raised an arm, steadying himself against the threshold. "You know what? I've seen your care, Maya. I've seen the way you touch lives," he declared, a gravelly authority punctuating his words. "Dr. Bennett may have tenure, but if there's a fight to be had, I'll stand with you." Nods of agreement blurred among the staff and families. The energy shifted again. There was something about the old man's declaration striking a chord in everyone who'd witnessed this spectacle. Little by little, their eyes softened towards me, until the tide truly began to turn. "You're right," Mrs. Thompson's daughter finally admitted, her voice cracking. "I just wanted to protect my mother. We just wanted you to take care of her." Frustration and exhaustion fogged the corners of my mind. In that moment, I almost caved. I could feel the tug of pity, the raw ache of her grief brushing against my own heart. I had felt that fear before, but I couldn't let her have the last word. "I know all of that, but this isn't about pity. It's about truth." I met her gaze unwaveringly, and it's time we held him accountable, instead of letting him off the hook while his faults fall heavy on my shoulders. But Dr. Bennett wasn't ready to give in just yet. His face flushed, palms on the edge of the cart, he searched the faces around us, desperately grasping for anyone who would hold his course. "I'll ruin all of you," he threatened, the anger driving him to shout, his voice quaking. "You'll regret this. You don't want to cross me." And in that moment, I felt it, a glimmer of pity for the man trapped in his own web of deception. but it was gone faster than it came. I slammed my fists against the table, the echo of the impact reverberating through me like thunder. "You're already ruined," I declared, every word wrapped in determination. "You've built your empire on the ashes of others' suffering, and I won't allow you to bury any more souls beneath your pride." With the fierce energy swirling around me, the wounds of our battle ripped open, stripping away the layers of deception. Shouts, accusations, tears, it all simmered and began to dissolve in front of our eyes, replaced by the unmistakable strength of solidarity. The fire was within us now, the undeniable truth piercing every heart that had witnessed this moment. And just like that, the spell shattered. Dr. Bennett's sneer evaporated, replaced by a pallor that betrayed the real fear hanging behind his bravado. He stood exposed, backed into a corner, and with one last defiant glare, I put the final nail in the coffin of his charade. "You should have known better than to underestimate me," I said, locking eyes with him one last time. "In the end, truth always rises, while lies drown in the depths of their own making." He faltered under that weight, and with that, the air crackled around us, charged with a fierce energy of emotional release. The illusion of invincibility burned away, leaving only a raw truth that lingered like the chill in the air. The room buzzed with disbelief, the momentum suddenly surging in my favor, the fabric of lies laid bare. In that charged silence, one small triumph echoed louder than the storm. "I am here to make sure the light never dims again." It's been 6 months since that explosive night at Willowbrook, where everything unraveled and transformed in ways I could never have imagined. Dr. Bennett is gone, his reign of sloppiness and arrogance dethroned by the truth we fought hard to expose. The administration listened, not just to the evidence, but to the voices of the caretakers who show up day after day. It's funny how quickly things can change when you dig your heels in and refuse to let go of belief, even when it feels impossible. Now, every morning, I walk into that care center with a new sense of purpose. I've taken on more responsibility, involved in new training programs intended to enhance our patient care protocols. My voice is no longer a whisper in the night. I lead meetings, empowering my fellow nurses to speak out, to act, to advocate for those who need it most. There are still days filled with frustration, when the weight of an aging system pushes down on all of us, but it feels different now. We're fighting for each other, not just for our patients. A team pushing against inertia, not silenced by it. And the most unexpected twist? I'm taking my first steps toward writing a book about everything I've seen. Each chapter gears toward the humanity behind the charts. The real-life stories of our patients who deserve their experiences to be shared. I see my work transforming lives, not just those in our care, but also the readers who will connect with these stories. There's a joy bubbling up in me as I write, a catharsis that threads through the difficult days. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself smiling into my notebook, caught up in memories of Mrs. Thompson, or the tender moments I've spent with so many families. I'm reclaiming my own history through their stories. Despite the daunting nature of the task, I feel more alive than ever. Sometimes there's that shadow of doubt, a whisper that says I could fail, that I could be another name of the forgotten, another casualty of the system. But every time that voice cries out, I remind myself of what I fought for, of the lives that were lifted up along the way, of the strength I found when I stood my ground. In this new chapter, surrounded by people who understand the weight of compassion, I'm not just a nurse anymore. I'm a voice, a witness to resilience, weaving together the tales of a community that won't go quiet again. There's liberation in that realization, and it's only the beginning. 6 months after the eruption that shattered my world at Willowbrook, things seemed to be threading together in a way I couldn't have imagined. The whispers of doubt that used to shadow my steps had transformed into rallying cries for change. The old guard was gone, and the spirit of empowerment that had taken We shared stories of our patients, highlighting the very heart of care. I led discussions on advocating for patient rights, the kind of advocacy nobody talks about on those annual reports. And with every voice that joined in, my confidence grew. I felt as if I were building something substantial, not just protocols, but a culture where compassion was the cornerstone of our practice. Just a few weeks ago, Mrs. Thompson's daughter, Melanie, arrived unexpectedly. As her familiar face appeared in the doorway, I felt a rush of emotions. She strode in with the determined air of someone who has seen the darkness and come out into the light. "I want to thank you," she said with genuine warmth, "for everything you did for my mother. I didn't understand then, but I do now. It wasn't just nursing for you. It was her life." Her words filled a void I hadn't realized was there. "It was about her, always," I replied, my voice softening. We talked, and I could tell the burden she had carried was becoming lighter. We spoke of grief, of healing, and of how love changes shape, perhaps more beautifully than we ever expect. By the time she left, we were both holding on to a profound understanding, a friendship forged from shared struggles. That night, driving home from Willowbrook, the horizon stretched in front of me like a canvas washed in softer hues. The sun dipped low, painting the world in deep oranges and purples, an echo of a sunset that seemed to reflect my own sense of renewal. For the first time in years, I didn't feel encumbered by regret. I had made choices that mattered. A knock on the door interrupted my train of thought. It was Clara, one of my night shift colleagues, standing there with a proposition. "We've been talking," she said, glancing back as if someone were waiting behind her. "We're organizing a community event, a fundraiser for the care center, and a Making a Difference forum. The whole staff is on board." As we brainstormed ideas, I could feel my pulse quicken with excitement. This would be an opportunity not just for the staff and residents, but for the community to come together, share stories, and acknowledge the fragility and beauty of life. It would put a spotlight on what truly mattered, the voices we had fought so hard to protect. Weeks melted into days, and the event unfolded into something beautiful. Families, the care staff, even former patients came to share, to learn, to connect. I spoke about the value of compassion and care openly, putting faces to our stories. As I looked out over the crowd, strong, brave souls, I felt a surge of collective strength that could change the world. When I finished speaking, the applause echoed, more than just appreciation. It was the sound of lives intertwining, the breath of a community reborn through care. At that moment, I knew I had found my place, my purpose. I wasn't just nurturing others. I was weaving a stronger community fabric, layered in the resilience we all shared. As I stood there, basking in what we had created, it hit me. This was only the beginning. I looked forward to each day, ready to embrace whatever new stories and challenges would come my way. Closing my eyes, I inhaled deeply, savoring the palpable energy in the air, a promise that echoed back to me. To everyone out there who's ever felt silenced, stepped on, or afraid, know this: your voice matters, your stories matter. This is the moment to speak up, to advocate for yourself and others, because together we can transform fear into hope and injustice into actions that matter. Be part of this journey. Subscribe immediately to the channel so you won't miss the next exclusive stories that inspire. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about this wild ride. And don't forget to instantly share this video with at least 5 friends who need to know this powerful conclusion. Let's keep this ripple going. Let's carve a future where every voice rings true.